Hey, what's up? It's Mr. Ippolito. Okay, so we're going to do the EdPuzzle for Let's Chat About the War of 1812. But I want to let you know, first of all, you don't need to do this EdPuzzle. If you just turn the paper in, you'll get an 8 out of 10. It's an 80%. It's a B. It's respectable. But if you want to do the if you want to go for the full 10 out of 10, you do this EdPuzzle, answer all the questions, and then you're eligible for the 10 out of 10. Okay, before we go any further, there's going to be one final question at the end that I'm going to ask you. This is the question right here, right? There's a quote that is from the Crash Course video. Sell a country? Why not sell the air, the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children? So who said this quote? And more importantly, what do you think this means exactly? Like, what is the meaning of this quote? Okay, so let's go ahead now and let's talk about this right here. Let's chat about the War of 1812. All right, we're going to go over the answers. First of all, which country did the U.S. declare war against in the War of 1812? It was, of course, Great Britain, the same country that we went to war with in the American Revolution. Let's move on to the next question. Why is the War of 1812 called the Second American Revolution? Well, the reading says because it took place, less than 30 years after the original American Revolution. But I think it was also the United States trying to prove that it could stand up to, we didn't exactly win this war, just to be clear. We didn't win, but we didn't lose, right? So we were able to successfully stand up to Great Britain for a second time in a row. And this was our first declared war, and so it made us feel good about ourselves, right? So this was a revolution to prove that we actually could be a nation. So those are some of the reasons why it's called the Second American Revolution. Next question, who was Tecumseh, and why did he do what he did? So he was a Shawnee chief, right, from the Ohio River Valley. You remember seeing the map, what's called the Old Northwest Territories, which today becomes the states of Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, kind of that land, that region right there. So he tried to gather up a large Native American army consisting of various tribes, including the Shawnee, and along with British support. So the British were supplying them with some weapons and money to fight against the American incursion into those Native American lands in the Ohio River Valley. So he wanted to take a stand against American incursions, against American pioneers settling in the Ohio River Valley, because those were ancestral lands of the Shawnee and other tribes. So that's who he was and why he did what he did. And then the last question in this section, what is a war hawk? Who were the main war hawks in the U.S. in 1812? So these two guys right here, John C. Calhoun from South Carolina and Henry Clay from Kentucky. So they were members of Congress from mostly the South and the West, mostly Republicans, Democratic Republicans, Jeffersonian Republicans, right, who wanted to go to war against Great Britain. And if you think about it, it makes sense for Republicans to want to do this, right, because they are Francophiles, right? They prefer France to England. Which means that they are generally opposed to England. The Federalists were the ones who loved England. They were Anglophiles, right? They loved Great Britain, the Federalists did. And so the Republicans from the South and the West, they're going to be more anti-Britain, right? And pro-France, just like Jefferson was. And so they're going to be more likely to go to war against Great Britain. Okay, so now let's scroll down here and we'll talk about the causes. Let's chat about the 5 causes of the war according to the reading and then also from the Crash Course video. First of all, what the British were doing to our sailors, of course, we've talked about this before. It's the practice of impressment, of boarding ships and taking American sailors. The next one, conspiratorial Anglophobia. This is the quote from Crash Course, right? It's not only a fear of England. Anglophobia is just like arachnophobia is a fear of spiders, or triskaidekaphobia is the fear of the number 13. Anglophobia is the fear of England, right? But it's specifically this fear that Britain was somehow plotting against the United States. It's, for years, the United States has always had some sort of conspiracy theories. We even have them today regarding COVID and masks and all sorts of things. Today, still conspiracy theories abound, but back then there were these strange conspiracies about England wanting to come back over and take over the United States again. So that was another one of the causes of the War of 1812 was this conspiratorial Anglophobia. Next cause, the British weren't allowing us to do this with other countries. It's trade with those other countries. We're talking about other European countries like France, Spain, Portugal, etc. And then finally, the fifth thing, what did we want to do with Canada? We wanted to invade, I'm sorry, this is number 4, invade or seize land from Canada. We were hoping to possibly go in and conquer part or maybe even all of Canada, who knows, possibly make it part of the United States. And then finally, a desire to expand into lands controlled by Native Americans. This was the fifth cause of the United States getting into the War of 1812. So now we've talked about causes of the war. Let's talk about outcomes of the war, or effects of the war, or results of the war. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. This is just a list of things that seemed interesting that popped up to me when I was doing the reading and in my research, and then also as we're watching the Crash Course video. And let my dog into the house. Okay, the dog is now in the house. She won't be barking, hopefully, anymore. First of the 5 outcomes of the war, explain what the Latin phrase status quo antebellum means. So status quo is the way things were, right? So if you talk about in a relationship, let's go back to the status quo. Let's just go back to the way things were before whatever happened, right? So the status quo is, let's just keep things as they are, or keep things as they were. That's the status quo. And then the Latin phrase antebellum, ante means before, and bellum means war. So essentially, the first and perhaps most significant official outcome of the War of 1812 is that no land or money changed hands. There was officially no winner or no loser, because everything just went back to the way it was before the War of 1812. Next, the war confirmed that the United States would in fact exist, and that we would never again be invaded by Great Britain, or really any other country for that matter, right? If you think about it, we were invaded in the War of 1812. The city of Washington, D.C. was burned. The White House was burned. Several other buildings were burned or just completely destroyed. White House was partially destroyed. Since the War of 1812, no foreign country has set foot in an invasion on American soil. We were attacked by the Empire of Japan in 1941, December 7th, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor, that was an attack, that was an invasion. And the 9/11 attacks were a terrorist attack. It was, again, an attack. It was not an invasion, nor was it done by a particular country. So this is the first, last, and only time that the United States has been invaded by another country. And that was Great Britain and the War of 1812. Okay, the next outcome of the war, it led to the death of which political party? It was the Federalist Party. And why did this party die? So they gathered at a meeting called the Hartford Convention, and they came up with, as you remember from Crash Course, some reasonable proposals. One of the reasonable proposals was, I think, to get rid of the 3/5 compromise. That seemed reasonable. Many Federalists were anti-slavery, right? And they were mostly from the Northeast, so that makes sense. They're from Boston or Philadelphia, or from New York City, so that makes sense that they would be anti-slavery. But another thing they did was they proposed or threatened to secede from the United States if their demands were not met. That seemed a little rash. And of course, they made what was worse. The worst thing for them was that they made their demands after the Battle of New Orleans, right? So here's this huge rousing victory for the United States, this huge rousing victory for our country, and we're feeling this surge of nationalism and so proud to be Americans. And the Federalists are like, you guys, you better do this or we're going to leave the country. And it was just really, really bad timing. They ended up making their demands after the Battle of New Orleans because news travels slow at that time, right? So, because there was no Twitter, as you remember from Crash Course. So, they really just made themselves look like complainers, and they made themselves look anti-patriotic, anti-American. And so the Federalist Party really dies after 1814, the Hartford Convention. Andrew Jackson becomes a hero in the War of 1812. How does he do that? Well, he and his ragtag army of misfits, and I do say that sincerely, it was just this army made up of all sorts of, a lot of poor and working class men, some Native Americans, some pirates, Jean Lafitte, the very famous pirate of the Gulf of Mexico, African Americans. It was this strange, even though Andrew Jackson was a slaveholder, this very strange ragtag army of people that you wouldn't expect to be together. They all came together to defeat a much larger British army. And by the way, inflicted, and let me go back to my notes here. I believe it was 71, something like 71 American casualties and something like 2,000 American casualties. It was a stunning victory for the Americans and a stunning defeat for the British Army. And of course, the funniest thing about the whole thing was the fact that it took place after the peace treaty had already been signed. So it was just sort of like icing on the cake for the Americans. And then I think finally, this is the last thing here, the last result of the war. According to John Green, how did Americans feel after the War of 1812? Even though it was a draw, right? Status quo antebellum, no land or money changed hands. It was technically a tie. We felt like we won. The war inspired a new sense of American identity, a new sense of American nationalism. We felt like, you know what? Not only did we fight the most powerful country on earth once, but we fought the most powerful country on earth twice, and we drove them out of our country twice. So it wasn't a win. Technically, it wasn't a win, but it felt like a victory for the Americans, right? And so now the United States sees itself as a true player on the world stage. We have a new sense of purpose, and that all kind of starts with our involvement in the War of 1812. Okay. So that was the handout, and so hopefully you got if you needed any help with that, you got that help. And so now this is the final question that I'm asking you here in this EdPuzzle, which is this question here. Who said this quote, and what do you think this means exactly? So you should know this because you watched it in the Crash Course video, but if you forgot it or didn't quite get to it, you can either go back in the Crash Course video, or you can Google this to find out who said this. But really what I'm looking for as the more important part of this response is, what does this mean to you, right? What does this mean to you? The person who's saying it, why are they saying it? What is the significance of this quote? That is what's going to get you those final 2 points on this assignment. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. And I think you have now, I'm not quite sure where I put my EdPuzzle question. I think I just put it there. So yes, so now you're done. And thank you so much, and have a great day, and I'll see you next time in class. Take care. Bye-bye.